Well, welcome back to the Growing Money Podcast. My name is Sean Trace, your host, and I have a really interesting guest with me today. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Amie Shapiro. I'm a financial advisor, and I am really passionate about teaching people how to do money stuff in a good way.
That's such a great description, actually, how to do money stuff in a good way. I was sitting there working with my daughter in her math class. First of all, we started up my daughter at, for people who don't know, I live in Vietnam. And we started up my daughter at a bilingual school that was a mix between international and Western. But what we found really quick was that it wasn't that much better than a public school, because the public schools actually are really drilling in on Vietnamese, and she spoke English well, and I was tutoring her on English on the side. So we figured that we'd put her into a Vietnamese school, and it's one of the top schools in the city. Public school, just really good school. But when we started doing math, I've been reviewing her math with her, and I was blown away by how poorly the math is being taught. And I'm not hating on the school, but just some of the things that were just basics that I learned. And like, she's only in second grade, but it was like long multiplication. And I was like, all right, when you do this, then we have to move the one up here, because, you got to carry it over to the next line. No one was teaching her that.
Wow.
And so she's like, and I was like, they haven't taught you this year? She's like, no, Daddy, I've no. And then to borrow from the next column for long subtraction.
Yeah.
I was like, you don't understand this? This is like the basics.
Yeah.
And it just struck me that, and I'm not hating on her school. Maybe they did teach it. Maybe it was just that there was a miscommunication, or she didn't quite understand it. So I'm gonna chalk it up to that. That give it the benefit of the doubt that's where it was at.
Right.
But at the same time, it obviously wasn't taught very well, because
it didn't stick.
Here's one student. Yeah, it didn't stick. Right. There was something that it wasn't taught in a way that could make it applicable. And so I pulled her aside, and I started trying to teach her about just basics of money, partially because so we have a really interesting thing that Vietnam, the Vietnam Dong, is 25,000 Vietnam Dong for $1. And so she has this 20,000 to her is not a large number. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't equate that. She's like, I was talking to her once about a computer. Well, how much is a computer? Well, a computer is about 1,000 for a low end to $2,000. And she was like, oh, that's not a problem. Here, we've got 1,000 dong. And I was like, no, these things don't match. So I've been trying to teach her basic financial concepts, because something so simple, conversion rates that most people don't have to worry about for a long time, is actually very applicable to my daughter. And, and working in these large numbers, $45 is 1 million Vietnam Dong, and so suddenly we're getting into these numbers that are conceptually a little bit harder. So why I bring that up is that one of the things that I when I looked at your list that you sent me this. So for people who don't know, when we're setting up this interview, you sent me this great list of kind of things that you focus on. And there were a couple of things on there that I was like, nice. I don't know how that works. There were some topics that I was like, okay, I'm good with this. Ooh, that one I'm not so sure. So talk to me about your experience with people and when they come to you and their education or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I work for a very small firm called Lula Financial. It's literally me and one other person. And we do things a bit differently than your normal financial person who calls themselves a financial advisor. We're non-custodial. And so what that means is we don't manage our clients' money for them. We basically teach them or give them the tools, resources, knowledge they need, and specific recommendations, of course, to be their own kind of financial wizard. But we're more like personal trainers. You go to the gym and you're like, okay, I want to get a rounder butt or like tight abs, or I want to work on my biceps. And your personal trainer is going to say, okay, great. You got to eat like this, and you got to do this many squats and this many burpees, right? But it's really ultimately up to you to follow the diet and actually do the workouts and show up to the gym. But if you show up to the gym, that personal trainer is going to be enthusiastic and help you do those things and teach you things you didn't know. So I'm kind of like that, but instead of getting your body in shape, I'm going to help you keep your finances in shape. And I think one of the most powerful tools in that is kind of understanding what does it all mean and what are all the different priorities? Yeah. And I mean, even with a podcast like this, right? As you know, you're one of many podcasts talking about finance, which I think 100%. Is great. But part of why I said yes to talking to you is because your intro to me said that you're kind of focusing on financial literacy, and that really aligns with what I like to do. And one of the most important things, or the biggest questions I get is, I hear that you're supposed to not have any credit card debt and you're supposed to save money, but then there's my 401k and Roth IRAs. And then what about buying a house? And like, what about saving for my kids to go to school? And, it's like so much, right? And there really is, at least in my opinion, an order of priorities to kind of make sure that you're hitting that. So thinking about it, like if you were going to build a house, well, first you have to buy the land to have the property, right? But then you're probably going to start from the bottom. You're probably going to start building up the foundation and then building on top of that. And then eventually you'll get to like design the inside and buy the furniture and stuff like that. But you're not going to, buy a bunch of furniture before you have the walls built in the house, right? So it's kind of like you don't want to put the cart before the horse sort of thing.
100%. My daughter and I, two things. One, going to the gym. You spoke my language there because I love going to the gym. I am, a type of person though that I like. My wife loves having a personal trainer that sits there with her and sits there and says, do this, lift this. And throughout the entire workout, they pace her. I hate that. I want someone that I can check in with, that I can give me a roadmap, give me a direction, and I'll follow it. But like, I want to be able to just feel my way through it. And so what I love that you spoke to there is there are different approaches for different people, and it's not one size fit all. Some people want to have that very hands-on, and some people just want someone who's going to go, I am here as your, I try to talk to people, and the analogy that I really love is, we're so lucky now that we have GPS and things like that when you want to drive somewhere, that you sit there. I'm old enough to remember that you would pull out the map and when we would drive cross country when I was a kid, you would have a map and you would chart your course. You'd fold in through the pages and you're like, hang on, I think we're in the Dallas metro area. Let's move to the Dallas metro, zoom in. And then if you take the wrong turn, you got to pull over and ask someone, hey, where are we? Show them the map. Like, oh, you're right here. So we're so lucky to have this overhead view now that shows us constantly the direction and where we want to be. But one of the things that I think is so important, you think about the people that used to navigate by the stars. And, and there was always that master compass reader, that master navigator on every boat. That was their goal, was to sit there and look at the stars and go, this is where we're at. And one of the most powerful things is a person who can sit and look and go, this is where you're at. Let's take a snapshot. Let's break it down. And I think it's so powerful to be able to have a person who can be like the snapshot taker for you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to steal that. Thank you. That's great.
Right. It's so great.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the other things that you just spoke to too, was building the house. So my daughter and I are doing an exercise that I really love. And so she was on YouTube way too much. And we make a YouTube channel for her. I literally, because of seeing the lack of content out there for kids, we created a YouTube channel called Ilani's Little World, where we make educational, fun content for kids. And then my own child is deep diving into stuff that I don't want her watching. So one of the things that she got hooked on was watching these Minecraft tutorials and walkthroughs. And they were essentially people talking about how to build. And the original video she started watching was how to play Minecraft, how to do Minecraft, how to build in Minecraft. And then she started getting into people that they created these characters and they were like creating little TV shows, like just in Minecraft. But sometimes the content was not great. And I noticed these people were just screaming all the time and yelling. And I was like, all right, we have a Nintendo Switch that you never use. I've got Minecraft on there. Today, you and I are going to sit down and play it. Let's just jump in and play. And we played in building mode because my daughter loves art. She's a little artist at her core. And so we are doing it in creator mode that you just get there and you're not worrying about dying or living or surviving. You just are building.
Yeah.
And when we start building a house, so she started building a house and I was like, all right, I'm just going to sit you here, start figuring out the controls, press buttons until you figure out what that button does. And I left her for an hour and she was like, I don't know. And I was like, just dive in, try it out. So she started playing with it. She came back. I came back an hour later. I was thinking there were going to be a couple blocks on the ground and she's like, Daddy, this is my house. I was like, whoa, that was amazing. And it was like this beautifully designed house that she watched all these tutorials and suddenly all of that information that had been stored there suddenly was able to come out. And so we created space. And then what I started doing with her was saying, all right, I'm going to challenge you. We found this beautiful mountainside. And I said, let's make a castle in the mountain. And she's like, we can't do that. I said, you can build a castle if you start one step at a time. Daddy, we can never achieve something so amazing. You can build a castle if you start one block at a time. Mm-hmm. And so we started going in and I found a place in the cliff and I was like, this is where our first room's going to be. And I said, she's like, what are we going to do? How do we build a castle? I was like, first step is to make a room. So we dug out a room. And it looked awful. It was just this bare bones, 4 walls facing the side. And she's like, Daddy, I don't feel like this is anything good. I was like, all right, well, what's our next step? We made the space. Well, I think we need to change out to get different material on the walls. I want it to be wood. Okay, that's our next step. We did that. All right, what's next? Well, I want to make the floor nice. We made the floor nice. And what we started doing was we started breaking down the process into these little steps and we started creating something amazing. Now in our video game, we've got this amazing castle in this cliff face. We've got a horse area. We've got our little farm and it's beautiful. And we achieved this over playing this game for about 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And every little, time that we had after she finished her homework and it was a reward. It wasn't just like straight playing. We jumped in and it was an activity we did together. When I look at financial planning, again, I started this podcast and this one of the things that I try to pitch to people when I'm introducing it is the difference for me. I don't know about money. I am not coming here as a financial expert. I am the far end. I'm the person who needs this help right now. Mm-hmm. But I also am tasked with creating something lasting for my daughter. As we were building her YouTube channel, I was like, well, what happens if we suddenly get this going? What happens if this becomes a thing and I suddenly have this influx of money? How do I steward that for her? How do I grow that? Because just like that castle, I might look at something and go, wow, that could be something. Mm-hmm. But I'm sitting there like my daughter going, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that what you were saying is as a financial advisor, you're the person who says you can build a castle. Mm-hmm. You can do that. Mm-hmm. Here are the steps.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Take some self-control sometimes, but yeah. Especially once you have, I think setting goals and having goals in mind is also really powerful too, because without that, you can just spend whatever money you're making on frivolous things that aren't really making your life any better, but maybe in the moment feel like they are. So
I can look around my room and see a bunch of those.
Yeah. Yeah. So, should we get into my order of operations?
Let's do it.
Hierarchy of needs.
Let's do it.
Great. So
yes, I love it. I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you spoke my language of this hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Let's dive in.
Okay. So priority number 1 for everyone is to really stay away from credit card debt, high interest debt, anything that's charging you a lot of interest to pay off something that's not worth as much as it was when you bought it. So when you think about credit card debt, a lot of times people get into credit card debt because they are living beyond their means. They're not able to pay off their credit card in full. And so they're putting things on their credit card because that's kind of the only way. And That's really like the worst way to do things. Honestly, if you're in credit card debt, if you can't pay it off, if you don't have a savings account or something, you probably need to live like a nun for a little while. And,
Right.
you can look into something that's called balance transfer cards. At least, in the States, you can do that sort of thing. But really, ultimately, living above your means is probably like the biggest financial flaw that you can ever make. And beyond that, if you're not in credit card debt, then you really should be creating a budget so you kind of understand, okay, what's my inflow? What kind of money am I making? What are my needs? What's, your rent or your mortgage or living situation, budgeting for the things that you need to have, food, maybe some fun stuff. And then what's extra, right? And so with that extra, you really want to be saving, ideally in a high yield savings account, of which there are many, at least 3 to 6 months, ideally, of your kind of normal average monthly expenses. And when I say monthly expenses, I don't mean like, oh, you're going to go, traveling to see family on the East Coast every holiday. This is like in an emergency situation, you've got 6 months to cover you so that you don't get into credit card debt, right? That's that move there. So that's really priority number 1 and priority number 2. No credit card debt and a savings account. And kind of in between there, with a lot of my clients, they, they're financing their car. And as most people know, a car is a depreciating asset. And if you're financing it, that means you're paying interest on something that is not worth as much as it was when you bought it. So it's costing you more to not pay off the car. Now, a car is a tool. So if you don't have a car and the only way for you to get a car is you have to finance it, you can't pay it off in full, then okay. But if you just have a car loan and you're not paying it off, it's kind of silly. And ideally, you shouldn't buy a car that's fancy. Just buy a car. It gets you from point A to point B. You're not trying to impress anybody at the red light. Or if you are, you should probably not be.
Right. I had a friend that came to me a couple of years ago, and this is something that I think is a big problem with cars. Cars are wonderful fun. If someone said, "Hey, Sean, do you want this beautiful muscle car for free?" I'd be like, probably yes. Probably not the smartest thing, but if it was free, I'd be like, maybe it's pretty cool But the thing is like everyone thinks they're going to look cool in the car and everyone's going to look up to them. But you know what? People look at that car and they think about themselves in that car. They don't think about you. Anytime I see a person driving a Lamborghini, I don't look at the Lamborghini. I don't look at the guy in the Lamborghini. I don't care about that person. Honestly, who cares? I just look at the car. It's pretty cool. And so if you think that car is going to make you look cooler, or people go, wow, yeah, that person's so awesome, it doesn't happen that way. It never happens that way. No. And it's not just, it's just bad financial choices. I remember that, and one of the things here in Vietnam, there's a 100% tax on vehicles. So a Honda Civic that might be $30,000 in the US is going to be $60,000 here.
Wow.
And it's crazy. And then, these cars have these insane taxes on them and people are still eating them up. Even though it's not a place that should have a lot of cars because our roads are just not made for it here. And it's horrible. Cars are filling the whole place and it's just making it awful. But I remember my friend was sitting down to buy a car and he looked at me and he's like, Sean, I've got 3 options: Honda Accord, Toyota Corolla, Volkswagen. It was like mid-level Volkswagen. And he's like, or Mercedes-Benz. And I sat there and I crunched numbers with him and I looked through all of the stuff. And, the Mercedes-Benz that he was looking at was like $120K.
Oh my God.
And I was like, how much are you driving this car? Well, I'm just driving it around town. My family needs to get to the doctor's office or something. And I said, are you, an investment banker who needs to show their wealth? And he's like, dude, I have my own supermarket. It's like a small supermarket. It's like mom and pop place. Okay, that's a great little business. And it probably, you might want to consider something that you can move some products in, something that doubles, maybe a minivan. Very simple type of thing. You have 2 kids, and I was like, but for me, if these are the options you're looking at, I'd probably pick the Honda Civic because, once you buy this car, that value is gone. Right. You take it off the lot and it's dropped, especially here, 10 grand immediately. The second you pull out of the lot. And 2 weeks later, he called me up. He's like, I bought my car. I was like, you did? And he's like, yes, I did. And I was like, which one did you get? Did you listen to my advice and get the Honda Civic? He's like, I got the Mercedes. And I was like, of course you did. And I mean, and I'm not hating on Mercedes, but where he was at in that situation and the financial situation where you have a car that already is expensive and here it has 100% tax.
Right.
It's like, that is $50,000 that is just literally lost.
Yeah.
And he went with the most expensive option that he could.
I mean, maybe this is just me, but when I see people in fancy cars, I'm actually thinking the opposite. I'm thinking like, that person's bad with money. Most people that are
right?
good with money don't have fancy schmancy cars. Unless they're like just so filthy rich that like money doesn't even matter. Yeah. But that's usually not the people who are driving. Usually if they're that rich, then somebody else is driving their car for them. So 100%. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the whole car thing to me is like a designer handbag. It's like that handbag is going to be made in Malaysia, just like whatever handbag you get from Target. But it's like this prestige. It's all made up. It's just it's a construct. It's not 100%. Really that much nicer. Maybe the interior is like 100% leather or whatever, but like, who cares? It's just a car is to get you from point A to point B. That's it. And I'm happy to talk about the differences between like a pre-tax account, like a traditional IRA or a 401k, and a Roth IRA, which would be a post-tax account, or even Roth contributions to that. But it's very kind of U.S. focused tax law, so I don't know if that's something you'd want to talk about on this show. Well,
let's dive into if it's important for that. Let's dive in.
Yeah,
and then we will. Because most of my listeners are in the U.S.
Okay,
so we can dive in.
Cool. So when you contribute to a pre-tax retirement account, those contributions are actually a direct tax deduction. And if you've got a 401k with your employer, you can actually contribute quite a lot. This year, 2024, you can contribute up to $23,000 to a pre-tax 401k. So for easy math, yeah, it is amazing. And so for easy math, let's pretend like you made $100,000 this year and you contributed $23,000 to your 401k. You're going to be taxed like you made $77,000 this year, as opposed to being taxed like you made $100,000, because it's a pre-tax contribution. So it's a direct income tax deduction. And because $100,000 is putting you in that 24% tax bracket, you're actually going to save, whatever 24% of $23,000, close to $6,000 on your federal tax bill that you would have had to pay had you not contributed anything, right? Yeah, it's amazing. So by saving money for the future, you're also saving money now. And then in your 401k, those get invested automatically. They grow over time, right? Hypothetically, usually.
Yeah.
And then in retirement, when you make a withdrawal from a pre-tax retirement account, those withdrawals are considered income. Only the withdrawal, not the full amount, just as you withdraw it. But typically, when you're retired, you're only taking out what you need. And so that withdrawal of income is probably going to put you in a lower tax bracket than you were when you were young and you were working, because you're not saving anymore and you're retired, and, your needs are probably going to be a little bit less. And so there's a tax benefit now to putting money into your retirement account. Plus, you're just saving more for retirement. And then that tax, you only get taxed when you make a withdrawal from it. So it's not like the whole nest egg gets taxed. So that's a pretty clear benefit in my point of view. And And then there's also post-tax accounts. Now, I'm not saying priority number 3 is to max out your 401k and also contribute to a Roth IRA. In fact, if you can afford to max out your 401k, you probably make too much money to directly contribute to a Roth IRA. However, let's say you work for yourself. There's retirement accounts that are called a SEP IRA or a solo 401k. Which allow you to basically contribute up to 25% of your qualified income. Or let's say you're an hourly employee. Maybe you're, you work at a restaurant or a retail place or whatever, and you've got income, but your company doesn't offer you a 401k. You can actually contribute to what's called a Roth IRA. And in 2024, you can contribute up to $7,000 to a Roth IRA as long as you make less than $141,000 in a year, or something like that. And these are post-tax accounts. So what that means is your contributions that you put into this account are not tax deductible. So like that example before, if you make $100,000 and you contribute $7,000 to a Roth IRA, you're not going to get any tax break this year. You're going to be taxed like you made $100,000. Okay. But you invest the money that you put into your Roth IRA. It grows over time. And then in retirement, it's never taxed again. The withdrawals are not considered income. There's no capital gains. So it's tax-free investment income in retirement, which is pretty freaking cool.
That's awesome.
So I would say at the very least, if you can't afford to max out your 401k, you should at least try and contribute $7,000 to a Roth IRA or contribute as much as you can within your budget to that 401k, because a lot of 401ks a lot of employers offer employee matching as well. And so you're kind of leaving free money on the table when you're not contributing to that 401k.
I was interviewing at a job at a university in the U.S. just like a couple months ago for a dean of student life. And the package was not great. And I was looking at it, but they had a, full matching for the 401k that was in there. And I was like, oh, that's actually a lot of extra money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of extra money. And I was sitting there thinking, I was like, wow, I could, get an extra 20,000 out of them if I were to, contribute 20,000.
Right.
And so that was something that I was sitting there looking at going, could I tighten my belt for a couple years and then just start funneling that money in, because then it would double, not double, definitely not double, but it would double my contribution.
Yeah.
And awesome.
I mean, technically, it's depending on how early it would exponential growth, that compound interest on those contributions eventually really, really important. And the other cool thing about that is that it's not taxed to you. So it's tax-free. It's a tax-free 20K. If they just gave you 20K, that'd be considered income. And so you'd probably end up with 13K or something like that.
When I first moved to Vietnam, there was an interesting thing I noticed. I lived I kind of existed in an area. It was like video games where I would play the same map. And I would tell that to my wife sometimes, that we'll be driving my daughter to school. And there was one landmark that was the furthest I went. I never drove further than that. It was the spot that I always turned around and went back, because it was this point of like, this is my comfort zone. And I remember it was the limit of my comfort zone. One of the cool things when I moved back this last time to Vietnam, I stretched my map out. And one of the things too, like when we hit things that we don't know about, when you were talking about these accounts, suddenly for a moment, I could feel it in my body. I felt this tinge of like, this is information I don't know. This is stuff I should know. And I felt a nervousness. And that's one of the things that I think is so great about what a financial professional can help you do, is they can sit there and go, all right, here's your hand. I'm going to help you out. We're going to get there. And it's like sometimes navigating this stuff, because, here I am 45 years old and I don't know the ins and outs of a 401k, an IRA account, a Roth IRA. I don't know this. And I'm sitting there going, and I'm feeling like an idiot, because I just didn't learn this early on. And so how do you work with people that come in and just feel like, I gave an example when I was talking in a previous podcast about, it was just me talking to the camera, that we should normalize talking about finances too, because imagine that you go out to dinner with friends and a friend goes, I am having problems with my partner, my husband, wife. Everyone's going to sit there and go, oh, let's talk about it. We are here for you. But if you sit there at a party and a person's like, I'm having problems with my finances, everyone's going to be like, whoosh. The wind is like gone from the room. Everyone shuts down. Like, oh, are they going to? Yeah. And see, that's awesome. And that's the way it should be. Yeah. Not you, because you're going to be like, yes, let's talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that. Well, thank you for your vulnerability, first off, because
thank you.
You are not alone in that. I wouldn't have a job, or I wouldn't be doing the job the way that I'm doing it if you were in the minority. I would say the way that you're feeling around this stuff is really super common and is honestly not your fault. And you are not stupid for not understanding it. Tax law is really complicated. We don't teach this stuff in school. And in fact, I feel like there can be even cultural shame, kind of what you're getting at, as to into being like, this doesn't make sense, and then when you start to talk to financial professionals, they're using all of these, acronyms and fancy words to kind of explain this stuff. And then you just feel like, well, that didn't help because I still don't understand and I don't feel comfortable asking the question because they're going to get impatient with me or they're going to think I'm stupid or something like that. And so I try and be like a safe space and make sure that my clients know, like, you can ask me questions. I don't want to move forward to another topic until you're feeling good about what I just said. And I want it to click, right? I want you to understand why saving, why putting money in a retirement account is beneficial, not just for the obvious, like, yes, you're saving more money, but how it can actually help you now and how it can really help you in the future. And so I actually get really jazzed when people are like, can you explain that again? Or like, what do you mean about compound interest? And then I'm like, let's get a visual out. Let's talk about this stuff. Right. It's really cool. And I feel like growing up, and I didn't grow up with a lot of money. I had a single mom and kind of had to figure stuff out. But I was always kind of innately good with money and was never shy about talking about it. And maybe it's because I grew up poor and was like, well, I got to figure this out, and I lived on my own from the time I was 18. And, it was never really a taboo subject for me. And so I'm very comfortable talking about money with other people and friends, strangers, whatever. But I understand that that's not common. And I wish it was. And I wish that financial literacy was taught in schools. And actually, it is starting to be now. I've heard about some. Yes, it's so needed. So important. So anyways, do you have any questions about anything that I've said
I want to
so
say,
far?
we're good. But you still have 3 more, and I want to dive into your next. Number 4. So we start contributing to our IRA, your 401k, your IRA, and then we go to step number 4. What happens in step number 4?
Yeah. So just contributing to a retirement account isn't enough. You can't, if you just put money like into a Roth IRA, it's not a 401k. It's not going to get automatically invested for you. And even in a 401k, I would say you should probably pick a better investment than whatever target date fund it is. We don't have enough time to talk about target date funds, but anyways, they're fine. They're fine. They're whatever. Anyways, you have to pick an investment. And when it comes to investing in the stock market, I am a huge fan of index funds. And index funds are a type of mutual fund. They I like to compare them to like a gift basket in the stock market, right? Like mutual funds are basically a gift basket. You can put whatever you want in this. Well, not you necessarily, but the people who manage these mutual funds can put different stocks bonds, real estate investment trusts, whatever. And when you get an index fund, it's passively managed. So that means that there's no like fancy people in New York doing all of this technical analysis and buying and selling and day trading and blah, blah, blah. It's just following a particular index. And my favorite indexes to follow are either the total stock market, US stock market, or the S&P 500, which is essentially like the top 500 companies. So to go back to your car analogy, the S&P 500 is like the Toyota Corolla of the stock market. It's like, it's nothing sexy, but you know it's reliable. It's been around for a long time. It's a good freaking car, right? So S&P 500 index funds. And there's a lot of different S&P 500 index funds. I typically recommend that people invest like wherever you're at. If you've got Vanguard, pick Vanguard's S&P 500 fund. If you're at Fidelity, pick Fidelity's. If you're at Schwab, pick Schwab's index S&P 500 index fund. The other index fund that I would, put a shout out to would be, there's now socially responsible index funds, which the best ones in my opinion are the ones that basically follow the S&P 500 minus like some bad oil companies and maybe some war, whatever. Anyways, so there are some like socially good ones. Some people will say you're just greenwashing investments, whatever. But if that's something that's important to you, those types of index funds are out there as well. And so when it comes to priority number 4, this is kind of where that balancing act comes, because there's some people where maybe their living situation is great and they can just focus on saving for retirement. And then there's some people that are like, well, I want to buy a house someday. I want to have a family. I want to have dogs. I love to garden. I want to buy a house. Putting money in your retirement account isn't necessarily going to help you buy a house. That should be for retirement. And so you do kind of have to, that's when you kind of have to figure out, okay, you've got this priority. You want to put money in a retirement account, but you also want to buy a house someday. So maybe instead of fully maxing out your retirement account, maybe you contribute 5% of your income, 10%, get that matching, and then try and contribute in equal to a non-retirement brokerage account. And so in doing that, you can actually automate those contributions and investments just like your 401k. So, like when you contribute to a 401k, the money comes out of your paycheck, right? And it gets invested in your 401k. You're not doing anything. It's just coming out every 2 weeks or however often you get paid, and it's getting invested automatically, and you just kind of set it and forget it, and it's fine. You can actually set that system up in a non-retirement brokerage account too, not necessarily from your paycheck, although you might be able to do that. But from your checking account, you can set up an automatic transfer and investment from your checking account to your non-retirement brokerage account to be invested in these index funds. This is called dollar cost averaging. And data shows that people who do dollar cost averaging tend to perform better than people who do like manual transactions in the stock market. One reason that they do better is because if you set something up to happen automatically, you're less likely to forget to do it. You're also less likely to spend that money on frivolous things that you don't really need.
Yes.
And then you're also not going to have an emotional reaction to whatever the stock market happens to be doing on that day that you decide to invest it in, because nobody has a crystal ball, right? So non-retirement accounts, the capital gains are what is taxed. So if you put $10,000 into an index fund and then a few years down the road, you go to sell it and it's worth $40,000, the amount of money that you're going to be taxed on is that $30,000 that your money made, not that original $10,000. But typically capital gains have a more favorable tax rate than your income tax rate. It's usually around only 15%, which is why, the richest among us don't pay their fair share in taxes, right? Anyway, so there are some tax benefits to making money with your money in a non-retirement brokerage account as well. And my recommendation is S&P 500 index funds, doing it automatically. and you want to hold it for at least a year in there because you want to take advantage of a long-term capital gain. And any money that you're going to depend on in the next like 12 months at least. So let's say you're like, oh, I know that I'm going to need to replace my fridge, or like I do need to buy a car this year. You'd probably want to have those funds saved in your high yield savings account, because the stock market goes up and down and up and down and up and down. So if there's any money that you're going to be relying on, you don't want it to be subject to that risk and that loss. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to go big, and the stock market happens to crash in those 9 months or whatever, that would be really unfortunate. So you only want to put money in the stock market if you're okay with saying goodbye to it for at least a year. Obviously, in your retirement account, you're saying bye to that until you're at least 59 and a half. But in a non-retirement brokerage account, you want to say bye to it for at least a year. And the average annual rate of return of the S&P 500 over the last 100 years has been 9.8%, which is kind of crazy. It's kind of a lot. And in the past 20 years, it's actually been closer to like 12 or 13%, something like that. So the stock market does crash. I have to say that, investing in securities involves the risk of loss, right? So you just got to kind of let it ride. Ideally, you're not even looking at your accounts. I don't want you to look at your accounts very often. Only look at them like maybe once a year, twice a year, like when you get those tax forms or whatever, sure. But ideally, you just want to let the thing grow, set it, forget about it, live your life, be happy, don't stress about the market fluctuations. When it crashes, that makes better headlines for the news, but more often than not, the stock market goes up.
That's awesome. And I think that, again, you have to, you see kids and they put the piggy bank there and they're ready to break that piggy bank. I got to get the money out. And I think that training ourselves to remember, like, no, you're going to set it there and leave it for a long time in the future and so maybe we need to start training kids with multiple little piggy banks. This piggy bank you can pull out from in a week. This piggy bank you can pull out from in a month. This piggy bank, we're not touching it for a long time.
Yeah.
And, and it just
real piggy banks,
training that.
You can open a high yield savings account for your kid and teach them about interest and teach them about compound interest too with that, without even being invested in the stock market. And right now interest rates are really high, which is great for a high yield savings account. Not so great for a mortgage, which we can talk about next. But yeah, it's really powerful. I think I started my first bank account, and it wasn't a high yield savings account, but I started my first bank account when I was pretty young. And I got really into saving any cash or anything that I got. I would always save half of it in my bank account. And maybe that's what made me a confident money person today. But yeah, it's really important to teach kids, especially young, the value of money, because they know what money is. They know how powerful it is. Yeah. So there are good lessons to teach them. But yeah, compound interest, the money that your money makes is also growing. So the longer you can leave it alone, the more likely it is to grow at an exponential rate.
I love that. So this is the next one that I've had guests talk, and I watch videos and I watch a lot of podcasts. People are all over the place on the next one. Buying a house, because I watch some people like, why would you buy a house? You're wasting money. And some other person's like, why would you rent? You're wasting money. And I've always been one that I would love to have my own house. It's something that's a goal of mine. But then watching all these financial advisors, I'm like, is it a good idea or a bad idea? Talk to me about buying a house and why you think it's what it is.
I think it depends on the person. To be honest with you, Sean, it seems like you kind of move around a lot, right?
No, we're all over the place. So yeah,
you're all over the place.
So it might not be.
I think the decision on buying a house has just as much or more to do with your lifestyle and what you want than it does with like, does it make, is it going to be a good investment? Like maybe, maybe not. I have some clients that, yeah, they like to move around a lot. They don't know like what city they're going to be living in, or they just like, they don't want a big house. They don't want a lot of stuff. They just, if something breaks, they don't want to fix it. There's some people who, like me in particular, I'm a dog person. I love my dogs. And renting with dogs freaking sucks. So, and I'm, tough. I knew that I was going to be in the place that I am for a while. And so it made sense for me to buy my house, and I got to take advantage of the really low mortgage interest rates that happened a couple years ago. And so I'm kind of stuck here, whether I like it or not. And I don't love my neighborhood, but anyways, that's a whole nother story. So I think buying a house can be a great thing if it makes sense for your life. But if you're moving around a lot, if you're kind of, I feel like it wouldn't make sense for you in particular, Sean, because renting out your house isn't always good. It can really backfire. You can have to fix, especially if you're not close to the house. And with home prices being what they are now and interest rates being what they are currently, like in this moment, I get a lot of people being like, I want to get an investment property. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Can you tell me why? And they're like, well, because my mom and dad had investment properties and now that's funding their retirement. And I'm like, that was awesome for them, because they were born in the right year, but I don't know. It's going to take, it's good. I think it's really hard. Anybody that's bought, and there might be certain places in the country that are better for that than others. I'm not a real estate market analysis. I don't pretend to be. But in most cases, it takes a while for an investment property to actually even net, not let alone actually make you money. And so to me, if you've never owned property before, I think it's kind of a bold move for your first real estate investment to be an investment property that you're renting out, because it could not be pretty. But if you are interested in, go ahead.
No, you hit on a point that I have a friend who made a lot of money in real estate, and yet it's a full-time job, managing her properties, going to places. And she always has these little unexpected things. Right now, she's dealing with having to replace the floor in an entire place because there was a leak, something happened, and hopefully the HOA is going to pay for part of it because it was a pipe. But then she has a legal thing, and so she's now sitting here. She's got renters that have had to move out for a period of time. And she's replacing the floor on an entire unit. And it's not as black and white as people think. It's what I've been finding.
It's not passive. No matter what way you slice it, having investment real estate that you're not living in is not passive. You can have a property manager. It doesn't matter. It is not a passive investment. But if you like it, if you think, well, maybe someday I'll retire in this place or whatever, cool. Awesome. But if your motivation is because you think this is going to make me rich, maybe, maybe not. That's kind of a risky assumption. If it does, it's going to take a long time. I also personally just have some moral opinions around people like scooping up properties and becoming landlords. But as far as primary residences go, it can be a great idea if it fits your lifestyle. And, just doing the boring, putting 20% down, getting a 30-year mortgage, because even at the higher interest rates right now, mortgages, there's no other way for you to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars, close to $1 million with really low interest. And a house, as opposed to a car, is typically an appreciating asset. And so that's actually good debt. A mortgage is good debt. If you put 20% down, you're likely that you're never going to be underwater with that house. And then you've got this stable you've got your fixed mortgage rate. So regardless of whatever inflation's doing or the rental market, that your housing costs are going to be the same for the next 30 years. And that's awesome. But I don't think that it's the answer for everyone. It doesn't have to be the thing.
And I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you have to look at people's situation. And one of the things that I am looking, and you tapped on one thing for me, like, because I am looking for stability, though. We have been popping from place to place, and I am looking for stability. But at the same time, it's like, but I don't know where we're going to settle. I have family in an area that is so, my family lives in the Napa Valley. When we moved there, when I was in college, it was a livable place. Now it is so insanely expensive that my brother had to buy land up over this mountain. It's a beautiful area now, but it's still affordable up there. But even up there, the prices are starting to go way up.
Not to mention the house insurance because of wildfires too.
Right? Right?
Yeah.
It's the costs are there, Well, let's move into step number 6.
Okay.
Talking about, and that important for me because I've got a little one and something I have to think about.
So this is actually the hardest concept for me to tell parents. The last priority for you financially is to save for your kids' future college education. And the reason for that is because your kids, if they choose to, can always borrow money from the government to go to school. But you cannot borrow money from the government to retire. And if your retirement situation is not in good shape, that is going to be a lot more detrimental on your adult child than if they have student loans to pay. So I typically only recommend... Oh, go ahead.
Wow. No, that's wow. That's a wow thought there. Like, that is wow. Keep going. I'll come back to that.
So this is always the hardest thing for me to get across to parents because I feel like especially now there's some social pressure or whatever it is that, you have to like, oh, student loans and you have to pay for your kids to go, you have to do all this stuff. And it's like, you really don't. Like, it's not normal. I mean, certainly there are wealthy families that are paying for their kids' college education, and that's really nice for them. But more often than not, like, you getting your kid through high school, like, congratulations. Like, you are amazing. You made a child, you made a human in this world. You brought up a good being. They went through high school and you freaking did that. Now, if they go to college, great. That's amazing for them. I actually think that kids should have some skin in the game because that is some crazy money that we expect. I'm personally a fan of junior college. I went to, community college. I actually got my college degree paid for by Starbucks, but that's a whole nother can of worms. So, awesome. There are ways to get a college education that aren't even putting yourself in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, like out the gate. But as a parent, you're not expected to pay for your kid to go to school. So I only recommend that my clients save for their kids' future college education if they've basically filled those other priorities. They have no credit card debt. They have their savings account in a really healthy place. They've been maxing out their 401k. They have some non-retirement savings in index funds. Maybe they own their house if that works for them. And then if they're like, we still have extra money, what do we do? I'm like, okay, go ahead and start a 529 plan, which are essentially tax-free investment accounts for your kids' future college education, as long as those funds are used for education purposes. So that's my hierarchy of needs.
That's awesome. Well, I love the hierarchy of needs sites too, because it does play into if you are, thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're drowning in credit card debt, you're not going to feel very safe. I remember waking up in a cold sweat after my daughter was born, thinking about trying to figure out financial stuff. And it was just this place where I was like, you know what? And that was kind of my starting point for learning more. I went back and I got my MBA last year because I was like, maybe that's where I'll get the information, and still didn't get all the information. I'm proud of myself, but it was a great look at these concepts about business and money. I got scholarship, and I'm super happy to get that information. But I think, again, it's so exciting to have conversations with guests like you, because I want other people to have more resources. And there are so many great podcasts out there, but this podcast is for the idiots like me. And like the people that are scared to ask those questions. And so I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this knowledge. And yeah, I'd love to have you back on again sometime.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, and thanks for putting this podcast together. This was really cool, and I'm happy. I'd be happy to come back, talk more about whatever else.
Awesome.
Yeah.